Recently, and by recently I mean like 8 months ago, I had never had an experience before this. I moved to an island in the South Pacific and have gotten the hiking bug, so I try and get out to new locations as much as I possibly can, with work eating into most of my precious time. This happened about 2 weeks ago. Since I live in the South Pacific region, it gets mighty hot, driving all but the most insane hikers indoors, unless it's at night. Of course, I'm a masochist, so I try and do all my hiking in the early hours of the morning or in the evening hours when it starts getting cool. I've never been afraid of going hiking by myself. I did it when I lived in Oregon and never ran into any problems with it. But my island isn't as friendly as my home state. I always carry pepper spray, and when I used to go hiking in Montana and Wyoming, would sometimes carry a handgun to ward off anything I couldn't take on, whether it was a bear or a person. But I had always gotten off considerably lucky. I got to the trailhead at about 6:30 in the evening. The trail was called 1,000 Steps, but in all honesty, it was mostly just a walk straight down to a cliff and then a grueling journey back up. I didn't want to go, but my dog, Mad Moxie, needed to be walked, and I had done the hike so many times I could probably do it in my sleep. The first thing I noticed when pulling up was an old rickety rusted-out blue pickup truck with a big plastic tarp over the bed to keep out the rain. They were pretty common on the island, affectionately earning them the name Guam Bombs. I didn't think much of it as I hooked up Moxie and started heading down the trail, trying my best to ignore the mosquitoes that were making a meal out of my exposed neck. Heading down the trail was relatively easy. Avoiding the banana spider webs, I felt the stress of the day slowly unwind as the underbrush grew darker and night approached. I made it all the way down to the water's edge when I noticed a man standing about 100 yards away. It was dark enough now that I could only see his silhouette, so I have no idea if he was looking at me or at the water, but I chose to ignore him and instead pull Moxie's ball from my backpack and throw it for her a few times to get all her wiggles out. After some time, the man started walking over to me and stopped about maybe 10 feet away. Now, I'm not a tiny waif of a woman. I'm 23 years old, and I stand at about 5'6", and this guy was just a couple inches taller than me, but most of the locals were on the smaller side. But something about him just felt weird. "Evening," I greeted, as he nodded, and I looked down at Moxie, who had just returned from running after the ball. I stooped down to pet her now sweaty head as the man kept his eyes trained on my dog. "Can I help you, sir?"
"Pretty dog,"
he responded mildly.
"You alone?"
"I have my dog," I said lamely, trying to sound braver than I was feeling. "I'm never alone." I tried to emphasize on the fact that I had my dog with me, but the man seemed unfazed by my statement.
"Oh, have a good night."
With that, he turned around and started walking back towards the trailhead. I watched his shadow disappear into the trees and waited for about half an hour before I too started walking back towards the path, my mind on high alert as Moxie pulled me through the trees and up the cliffside. The crickets pierced the night as I climbed the steps, illuminated by my flashlight. My hands were full with Moxie's leash and my light, but you could bet your buns I would have my pepper spray out if I had an extra hand. Finally, my light pierced the trees at the top, and I practically booked it up the hill. When I got to the top, I nearly shat myself. The rusted blue pickup truck was sitting in the parking lot still, but the passenger side door was practically touching my car's driver's side. Inside the car, I could faintly see 2 men sitting in the cab, and I could feel them watching me. Slowly, I approached my car, walking as far over to the passenger side as I could, and kept Moxie with me close as I opened the door and crawled over to the driver's side. At that moment, the door of the pickup truck flew open and my dog started going apeshit, barking at the 2 people who were now outside of their car and trying to break into mine. Hard in my chest, I rammed the keys into the ignition and tore out of the parking lot so quickly I nearly tore my mirror off. I told my mom as soon as I got home, and she begged me to call the police. Unfortunately, the police here on the island aren't as vigilant as they are on the mainland, and that area is known for car thefts, muggings, and other debaucheries as I learned from my coworkers later that week. Earlier this month, another girl actually disappeared from that area without a trace, and it makes me wonder if the men in the blue pickup truck didn't have something to do with it. If I hadn't had Moxie with me, would I have been mugged, or worse? If I learned anything from this experience, it's that for my lady hikers, please always take pepper spray with you, go hiking in groups, and always let someone know where you're going. It might save your life someday. First of all, I'd like to mention that this story took place in a small city in the United Kingdom called Hull, also known as City of Culture 2017. The incident took place when I was 17 years old. I'm 20 now. I started working when I was 17. I got a job at a Subway sandwich store in a pretty sketchy part of town. Within a few weeks of starting working there, I was left to do early morning shifts and late night shifts on my own. Considering I'm a female with very little self-defense skills, this absolutely terrified me that I was alone and so vulnerable. Now, the place was dodgy and so illegal, but that's a whole other story. I'm not going to get into details about the layout of the shop, but let's just say it's an old building, very run down, thin ceiling, and a flat above the shop. I usually got stuck with the early morning shifts, which meant I'd be alone in the shop at around 6 a.m., and in the UK, mornings can be dark as hell. I'd go about my daily routine of setting up shop/food before opening at 7 a.m. As the mornings are usually quiet, apart from the odd usual customer, I'd be in the back making the bread. Because I'm a girl who's always paranoid at the best of times, I always felt like something wasn't right. When it was dark outside, I couldn't see much through the window, and I felt like I was being watched. This particular day was like any other. I did my morning duties. I heard the usual banging and shouting coming from the flat above, but nothing was different. It came to about 11 a.m. My colleagues and I sat having a short break, as it was all quiet in the shop, and we took the opportunity anytime we could. A few customers walked in. We both got up and took people's orders. After we finished up, people sat down to begin their lunch. For the sake of privacy, I'll call my colleague D. As D and I were chatting behind the counter, I glanced at the shop window and noticed the guy from the flat above had just come out the front door, which was at the side of the shop. Something didn't feel right. What I saw wasn't right. In his right hand was an air rifle. Living in the UK, we don't see many guns, but I know for sure that it was an air rifle, and it was definitely real. He carried it under his right arm like a trophy. He seemed so nervous and just all around weird. He carried on walking towards the end of the road where he just stood at the curb, glancing around, and then looked straight into the shop. I didn't like where this was going, and since he had a weapon on him, I hurried to the door and shoved my keys inside, locking D and several other customers inside. Everything happened so fast. I felt like I was overreacting, or maybe I've watched too many movies of these things happening, but I knew I had to protect people no matter what. A few moments pass. Police come and a chase goes down. I witnessed this psychopath raise his gun at a police officer and hold it against her chest before running in the opposite direction. That's when I knew shit was gonna go down. I had never seen anything like this before, and to be honest, I was nervous. I had never heard a gunshot before, and luckily, I didn't get to. More and more police personnel arrived, and we found out that the guy had been caught and detained, though I realized that no police officer had come over to search the flat above the shop. Since I knew that's where he came from, I informed the police that he lives in the flat above the shop, and lo and behold, they find several other guns and a load of drugs. Turns out the guy was extremely dodgy and potentially dangerous. Even though this situation didn't take anyone's lives, nor did anyone get hurt, to think that I spent so many hours on my own with a madman who was hoarding illegal weapons and drugs right above me really makes me think of how lucky I was to never bump into him at night or at early hours in the morning. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. If you would like a chance to have your story featured in an upcoming video, make sure you email it to urmaker6260@gmail.com. I really appreciate everyone watching this video, and I'll catch you in the next one. And just remember, it's always scarier if it's true.